Hello, beautiful people. I just wanted to make this video kind of detailing where I've been in the process of applying to physical therapy schools and kind of share some advice that I've given that really helped me, and hopefully it'll help you all too. All right, so let's talk about physical therapy schools. So basically what you need before you even apply is to meet a certain GPA, to take the GRE, to complete the prerequisite courses, and to complete observation hours. Sorry if I'm looking down, I have notes, so it's not me like incoherently blabbering. Going back to that, so GPA, prerequisite courses, those depend on the school. Each school has a different GPA that they want you to hit and a different set of prerequisite courses. I will say the GPA kind of, for the most part, remains consistent per school. However, prerequisite courses can be different. For example, one of the schools that I'm applying to requires exercise physiology, which none of my other schools required. And if I hadn't taken that and didn't notice that, then I wouldn't be able to apply to that school right now. So that's just something really important to figure out. Observation hours also differ from school to school. Some schools are okay with you just going to one setting. Other schools want you to hit 40 hours, some want you to hit 100 hours, some schools want you to do two different settings, for example, an outpatient clinic versus an inpatient clinic. So just kind of make sure that you have your ducks in a row. I would say start looking into this like a year or two before you plan to apply, just to make sure that everything's good, which is kind of hard because you're not sure where you want to apply to yet. However, it is important to do it early. So now that you have all of that done, the next thing, when you actually start applying, you will be filling out this general application called PTCAS. For those of you who are an undergrad right now, you might remember filling a similar application called the Common App. Basically, it's one application that you fill out and you send it to all your schools. It contains just one universal personal statement, and that's just makes it easier on you that you don't have to fill out all your information, write another essay for every single school. The same idea is used for physical therapy in the form of PTCAS. So again, it's just a general application that almost all doctorate of physical therapy programs look at. PTCAS itself is divided into 4 parts. So the first part is kind of your general information, where you put in like your name, address, a bunch of questions of citizenship, and it has a few extra statements as well. The next section is the transcript entry section. As it sounds, you just kind of input your grades. The third section is the biggest section. It contains a bunch of things: your observation hours, your activities, your personal statement, your letters of recommendation, etc. And the fourth section is the supplemental section. So let's talk about the first section. First section, pretty straightforward. You kind of put in all your information. I would say the only things you really have to think about is the 2 prompts. The first prompt is, how has your academics been? Like, can you explain dips in your academic performance? This is a great spot, especially if you're someone like me who didn't start off with the best GPA, to kind of explain why that was the case. So for example, if you went to a high school that really didn't push you or have college prep, and then suddenly when you were in college, you were competing a bunch of kids who had like all these AP courses already, it wasn't fair, and that's a struggle that you had to deal with. The second question is based on this current cycle, just because it has to do with COVID-19, and it kind of asks you to talk about how your summer plans were affected, how your grades were possibly affected. That's kind of where you put that. And that's basically the first section. The second section, again, straightforward. You kind of just read off your transcript and input it on there. It offers to pay you like $70 for a transcript. Please just input it yourself. Like, it is so much easier and cheaper. And that's like a theme of PTCAS. The amount of money that they make off of your application is crazy. Like, I'm only applying to 6 schools, and I think I'm going to have to spend like $600, which is that's a whole nother ball. bag of issues that I don't have time to talk about right now. So the third section, again, like I said, is the biggest section, but let's break it down. So the first part is the activity section. Kind of asks you to put down what you, like, list everything that you did, how long you did it, and it has a little passage or a text box at the end where you kind of list what you did and, most importantly, what you learned from it. So for example, I worked at a gym where I worked with people with disabilities to help them strengthen. So I would put, that's what I did. I worked with people with disabilities, and it taught me, it gave me one-on-one patient experience. It exposed me to the different populations of people, for example, children and people with disabilities, among other things. So the most important thing to hit on is what you learned from the experience. All right, next part, observation hours. This is kind of where you put all the places where you observe your undergraduate career. My biggest tip is every single time you observe somewhere, at the very end, send an email to the physical therapist you shadowed and just be like, hey, just to confirm, I observed you from this date to this date, and it was for these many hours. That way, when you're applying your senior year, you can just go find that email and find the dates that you shadowed as well as the hours that you shadowed for. Just because it's such a pain, and you don't want to be in that case where you're like trying to hunt down the physical therapist and they don't even remember themselves probably. So that is just a helpful tip. Next section is the letters of recommendation. So this is kind of the timeline I was given, and I stand by it because I think it is very error prone. So basically, PTCAS itself opens up at the beginning of July, middle of June kind of time frame, and to even get a letter of recommendation, you need to set something through there. So basically, you can't even send an official request until after PTCAS opens. However, I will say, reach out to the people you're interested in asking for letters a month before. That way, they have more than enough time to just commit to it. And also, if they say no, you can find someone else instead of them saying no right before you plan on submitting, and then you have to scramble to find someone else. So that's kind of a big tip that I would say for letters of recommendation. All right, the next part is, I'm trying to think, the actual essay. So this is kind of the meat of it. It's where you talk about yourself. For me, this was the hardest part, just because I really don't like talking about myself. But you do. You have to brag about yourself, and I've actually gotten a lot of good tips on personal statements. I will say you should reach out to your writing center. Every school should have a writing center, and in that writing center, they do have separate workshops, and there should be one for health professions applications. So there, it's so helpful. Like, they give you such good advice. For example, they tell you to focus on a few traits instead of many traits. So I would say the rule of thumb they said is focus on 2 or 3 that you can, characteristics of yourself that you can support with examples. I mean, for me, this is kind of hard, and for a lot of people it is, because you want to talk about so many things, but really going broad is going to hurt you more because you cannot justify why those characteristics are true. So please, one of the biggest tips I've gotten is to stick with 2 to 3 traits. And also like little things about like being specific about names, as long as they don't break HIPAA, which is kind of like the privacy rules for hospitals and clinics and stuff like that. So those are kind of the tips. Writing centers also have people there to help read your essays, as well as your pre-health center. So those are going to be your 2 biggest resources, I would say. It's important before you start like sending everyone your statements that you make sure that there isn't a cap on how many times you can meet with someone. For example, my writing center is like, you can only meet with us 4 times a month. So kind of making sure that whenever you send a draft, you made substantial enough changes where we're meeting with them 4 times is sufficient. But yeah, that's what I would say about the essay. It's really short too. Like, for me, I feel like I write a lot and I hit that character limit like instantly. So just kind of be aware of that. I think it's 4,500 characters, at least this year. So yeah, that's something to think about. I'm trying to think. Ooh, another good piece of advice is when you feel like you're done with your personal statement, send it to random people and just ask them this question before they start reading. Is like, what do you learn about me? Like, what traits do I give off in this essay if you didn't know me? That way you can learn if the essay is conveying what you need to convey. Cool. So that's basically a rough rundown of the essay. And I think that makes up the third section. So the last section is the fourth section, and it is the supplemental essay section. So essentially, along with PTCAS, a lot of schools also require additional questions that they want you to answer. They're not as long as the personal statement. However, they're very important because it's basically what the school values and what they're looking for. So I would say please spend a good amount of time on your supplemental essays as well. So some tips that I've gotten is look on the school's website. A lot of schools have an about us or about our incoming class section where they kind of talk about the traits that the school values the most. And with that, you can just talk about, if you hit those traits, talk about that in your essay. And that way you'll know, like, you have the traits that the school's looking for, and it'll make you look good. Another thing that I will say about writing is be genuine. If you haven't had a certain experience, if you don't have a certain skill, be honest. Do not lie about it. That's kind of like the biggest thing I've heard from advisors is like something like diversity. If you've never worked in a diverse setting, don't talk about it. Schools don't expect you to be perfect, and they'll honestly respect you, and it'll make you look like a better applicant if you're like, hey, honestly, let's stick with the diversity example. Honestly, I've never worked with a diverse population. However, I know that the school is putting a big effort in it, and I'm really interested in learning about it because of how important I think it is. Just as you just frame it as something instead of a weakness, as something you are looking forward to, and that will honestly make you look like a better applicant. As for timeline, okay, so this is kind of a big one. So some of you may be asking, how does submitting work? Basically, you submit the primary application, so anything that I talked about in the previous three sections, your personal statement, your activity history, the general information, all those things, you submit first, along with you need to also at least apply to one school. So let's say I'm applying to school A and submit my primary application. And after that, if you want to apply to more schools, you can just submit that as you're ready. So a question that I had was, how do you know which schools to submit first? And this is something that you need to reach out to each of your schools to, because some schools have something called rolling admission. Basically, how that works is that they start accepting people before the deadline of their program. So let's say that a school's deadline was November 1st. However, they're already going to be accepting people in August, in September, in October. So if you apply, let's say the day before, October 30th, like 90% of the class could be full, and they could have already filled the niche that you provided in your application. So it's important to kind of prioritize those rolling admission courses. That way you have the best chances that you get. And then there are some schools who are like, we're not even going to look until after the student applies. And obviously we're not going to look until after the deadline has passed, so it doesn't matter when you fill it out. So obviously put those schools at kind of the bottom of your list of deadlines. So yeah, I don't want to make this video any longer, but these are basically my tips. I realized that I've kind of skimmed through a lot of it, like how I studied for the jury, how I wrote my personal statement, etc., etc. So if you have questions about any of the specifics, let me know, and I'll definitely make another video about a specific part of the application. And I also want to say that I'm not an expert. Like, I literally haven't gotten in anywhere. I don't even know if my application is remotely competitive, but I just wanted to share my experience so far because I think it'd be helpful. So yeah, leave a comment if you are interested in hearing anything specific, and I'll definitely make another video. I hope you all have a great day. Bye.